Hey there, this is Ross Scissor. This is the Backcountry Fly Fishing Podcast, where we talk about the things that piss us off in fly fishing. We are back to Complaint Corner. We do one of these every single season because they're fun and because they're sort of an interesting outlet for me, so that I'm not sitting around stewing on stuff that drives me nuts in the fly fishing community and the fly fishing world and industry, such as it is. And this season's Complaint Corner is about something that I'm sure some of you are going to find offensive. I am sure that many in the fly fishing, whatever you want to call it, cultural zeitgeist are going to find highly offensive. And you know what? I don't really care, as usual, because I have a problem with this. I think that it is something that degrades the sport a little bit, diminishes the value of the sport and the fish and the places that we go, and frankly is just sort of annoying to a point where it makes me avoid certain people, certain pages, certain things, certain shops, certain whatever who are engaged in it. And the issue is big fish bros. And now listen, when I say bros, I'm just going to say this up front. I'm not necessarily just talking about men. Don't come after me and saying that I am leaving out women or that women don't also fly fish. They do. And female fly fishers can also be bros because it's not really a gender thing. It is a mentality thing and an identity thing and a posturing thing, which is really the worst part. And you guys kind of know who these people are, right? Like, this is one of those terms where I'm not sure I really need to define what a big fish bro is. You probably can piece it together pretty well. These are the guys who are doing grip and grins constantly with the largest fish that they can possibly lay their hands on. These are the guys who are constantly talking about chasing hogs, in quotes, or tanks, in quotes, which, like, look, have we all said the word hog and tank? Yes, we have. But if that's something that's part of your general fishing lexicon and something that you really are constantly throwing around, you might be a big fish bro. They are also the people who really have this belief that fly fishing is only worth it if you're catching big fish, the biggest fish in a river, or even objectively big fish, right? Because there's a difference between a relatively big fish, which is to say a fish that's big relative to its environment, like a wild Freestone Creek fish, a 15, 16-inch fish. That's a pretty damn big fish for that system. But these guys are talking about big, crazy fish, right? 20 inches plus, 24 inches plus. That's kind of stuff that you see coming out of like, New Zealand or Iceland, where they're like 3 feet long or something insane like that. And they believe that that's all there is to it. That's all they chase. It's all they want to talk about. They don't want to mess around with little fish. They are just big fish bros. And all they want is to catch big fish and then post pictures of big fish and then to talk about how big their fish was and to tell you about how big their fish was and then to compare the sizes of the fish and decide who caught the bigger fish. Which, in addition to being sort of asinine and meaningless from a sport perspective and a fly fishing perspective, is also just super annoying. We, as in the royal we, sort of the wider community we, are not interested necessarily in how big your fish are. We're not interested in whether your fish were bigger than Jimmy's fish. I'm not really interested in whether you catch more big fish than your dad, or more big fish than Johnny over there, or more big fish than me, for that matter. I just don't care. It's not that interesting to me. And it starts to grate on me because it turns fly fishing, and really more specifically, the public facing brand or positioning of fly fishing as a sport into a place where it's about trophy hunting. It's not about connection. It's not about being in tune with nature. It's not about wild places. It's not about respecting the resource or respecting the fish. It's about posturing. It is about competition. It's about ego and it's about trophies. And I think that that is a very different approach to the sport than I take, and that, to be honest with you, most serious anglers and outdoorsmen that I know take to the sport. It kind of cheapens it, right? It reduces it to scoreboard with trophies instead of field goals. And that's something that I just don't think fits very well in the fly fishing universe if Our goal is to be connected and reverent and respectful of the sport, the places, the animals, the fish, and everything that goes along with it. And so, really, this has become an increasing problem for me because I get a lot of direct messages from folks that say something like, well, listen, dude, your fish are always, so you're always posting the same, 10 to 12 inch fish. And like, why are you going to places that are super dangerous? I posted something on Instagram, I don't know, a few weeks ago about a snowshoeing trip that I took to a relatively low high lake. This one's at like 10.5, so it's nothing crazy, but I snowshoed up there to fish the inlet. And I got up there. The inlet was partially refrozen after a late spring snowstorm, but there were like 4 feet of open water that I managed to fish, and I caught one single 8-inch brook trout. Now, to get there, I had to snowshoe 3 miles. I had to hike another 2 miles. I had to cross multiple avalanche paths. It wasn't terribly safe. It was cold. And this person said, why would you do that? Why? To catch an 8-inch fish? He's like, I mean, maybe if it was a 28-inch fish, I would have done it, but not for an 8-inch brook trout. And he and I kind of we had a conversation. We kind of, I won't say that we had a altercation because it was pretty respectful, but we talked about it quite a bit. And I told him that he was completely missing the point. The point for me was that I got to the place and I got to fish the place and I caught one fish. Although, to be honest with you, if I had caught 0 fish, I still would have been fine with that too. But I wanted my one fish. I caught my one fish, and it was more about the accomplishment of being in that place than it was about the size of the fish. And I'm constantly hearing from people who feel this way. They are telling me, well, look, what you do is cool, but I just can't imagine getting excited for 10-inch brown trout or 10-inch cutthroat trout or 8-inch brook trout or whatever. That's just not for me. I like to fish for big fish. I like to chase hogs, as they say. And that's okay. I mean, listen, if you want to be a big fish bro, if that's what makes you happy, if that's really the only kind of fly fishing that you have an interest in and it's what brings you joy, okay, knock yourself out. That's definitely not for me. I think I could make a pretty strong case for the fact that anything that is overtly competitive and comparison based, where you're comparing the size of the fish you catch or how many big fish you catch to someone else, probably sucks the joy out of it pretty quickly. It's like that old quote, comparison is the thief of joy. I would be willing to bet that you're not actually having all that much fun with it if you're off into the competitive, comparative universe of fly fishing, and that's really not the point of fly fishing. But hey, you do you. If that's what you want to do, knock yourself out. But to me, from my perspective, I find it almost disrespectful, right? Because for a few reasons. The first one being that you are basically saying that you want to override the natural order of these river systems. Because the truth is that most wild fish in wild rivers, freestone rivers, so not tailwaters, we're going to talk more about tailwaters here in a minute, but not tailwaters, these big, wild, open, free-flowing, natural river systems, you're often not seeing enormous fish in those systems. Now, look, could you catch a 24-inch monster in one of them? Yeah, sure. Could you catch one that's way bigger than average? Yeah, for sure. But if you spend a lot of time in backcountry locations or wilderness locations or wild places with really genuinely wild fish, there's no human interference whatsoever. Those fish are typically not very big. They just aren't. The average trout in one of these systems, it really doesn't even matter what type of trout they are. I mean, yeah, rainbows and browns get a little bit bigger in general than cutthroats and definitely brookies, but it's not that species dependent. The truth is, most of the fish in these sort of wild systems are not getting much bigger than like 10 to 12 inches. And to be honest, there's quite a few that you catch in there that are like 6 to 8 inches, and that's just the way it is. And there are reasons for that. The biggest one being that these fish live in places where food's not guaranteed for them, right? They don't have a big dam flushing endless supplies of bugs and crustaceans and food supplies down to them to eat. They have to fight to survive in these wild places. And especially in streams where you have a lot of fish, just a lot of density, like in a small creek. I was just in a creek actually this last week that at its widest couldn't have been more than 15 feet across. And it was stuffed with fish. I have no idea how many fish per mile were in this thing, but I mean, it was insane. You couldn't take a single step without 27 fish darting off in every direction. It was just packed with them. And when there are that many mouths to feed and that much competition for food and for sustenance, the fish just aren't going to get very big, right? And the really, really big ones in those systems are the ones that outcompeted everybody else. And yes, they are in there But there aren't that many of them because most fish in those universes just aren't that big. And to be honest, even the really big fish are probably not bigger than 15 or 16 inches, maybe 18 at the outside. But, they're just not really big. Actual wild trout in actual wild systems, they just don't get that big, which tells me that if all you're ever fishing for are big fish, because you're a big fish bro, you're not fishing in what I would consider to be terribly natural places. You just aren't. And in fact, that's one of my other complaints with this whole big fish bro culture is that it seems to have not just a tolerance for artificiality, but almost a preference for artificiality. Because the truth is, if you want to hunt only huge trout, you can really only do that in a few places, right? And a lot of those places are not natural. Now, look, are there some places where you have some natural fish, like in a big lake, for instance, that get pretty big? Yeah, that happens. I'm not going to say it never happens. But in general, you're finding really, really big fish in like tailwater situations, places where the river is being controlled by a dam. Therefore, food supply is being impacted by the dam, currents are being impacted by the dam, flows are being controlled, temperature is being modulated. Those are not wild places, not in the truest sense. Now, can you hike into a tailwater that feels pretty wild? For sure. And I do that during the winter quite a bit. But they're not really wild. Those systems are being influenced and being touched by human beings and by outside stuff. And that is creating the conditions for these huge, monstrous fish to exist, especially in the numbers that they do. And big fish bros, they are so obsessed with catching this fish that they never really stop to think about that artificiality. It's like, man, why is every fish in this river so much bigger than the average trout in a freestone? Why are there so many massive trout in this particular lake? And the answer in most cases is because they're stocked and they're holdover trout that then live in the lake for years. And they might be wild-ish eventually after 5 or 6 years in there, but they're not real trout. And look, that's true in some places that I fish as well, like high alpine lakes. A lot of those lakes are stocked by airplanes with fingerling cutthroat. And every now and then one of those cutthroat gets pretty big, but they're rare. And most of the cutthroat that you catch, they're not living for a super long time. They're only up there for somewhere between 6 and 8 years before they die off. They can't spawn naturally. And they're not trophy fisheries. They just aren't. And if these folks are out there consistently looking for trophies, they have to be doing that in trophy fisheries. And those trophy fisheries are just mangled by human interference and interference from civilization. Either it's a tailwater that's messed with by a dam, or they're pressured to bits by being fished constantly, or there's some other environmental factor going on, like for instance, huge fish downstream of a water treatment facility. I've done this in Montana where the fish are much bigger. Why? Because the water stays warmer downstream of that. So there's more food for them to eat. But those are not natural conditions. These are not natural streams, at least not in the truest sense of that word. And the result of that is that they just, for me, feel artificial in a lot of cases. Does that mean I'll never fish them? No. But does it mean that I think it's awesome that you, big fish bro, really only want to fish places where the conditions are exactly right to grow enough monsters that you can be reasonably assured that you're only going to have to touch a big trout? No, I don't have a lot of respect for that. And I think that it is out of whack with how trout actually are as animals, with how most wild river systems actually operate as ecosystems and natural patterns. And I just think it's a little bit icky, right? It's not too far off. This one's going to get me in big trouble, so sorry, but I'm going to say it. It's not too far off from like big game hunting on a fenced preserve where the animals are fed to grow to a certain size. It just, whether those fish are being fed pellets or not, which by the way, club fishing where they're stocked and then fed to get to that size is the height of artificiality. That is legitimately gross. I get upset when I catch one of those fish, even accidentally, like upstream or downstream of one of these club fisheries. That's just nasty. But in any case, this isn't much different than hunting for, big animals that have been fattened up in a controlled, enclosed, optimized environment. That just isn't real. It's not. And I cannot understand why somebody would want to go chase that. I truly cannot. I would rather catch 5, 8 inch brook trout in a stream that are there naturally doing their thing than I would 2 or 3 or even 30 20 some odd inch fish that are either stockers or pellet fed or have been managed into being Goliaths. I just am not into that. And that just isn't, that's a fundamental difference in understanding of the sport. And it's fundamental enough that it makes my eyebrows cock and it makes me sort of twitch when I see the big fish bros. They're like, I'm only interested in the big ones, man. It's like, well, then that means you're not really fishing in what I consider to be real places that offer real connection and real understanding. Man, I don't like it. So that's my big thing on that front. And that leads me to sort of the last thing here, which is that these people are sort of missing the point, right? Instead of chasing skill and mastery and personal development and authenticity and satisfaction and fulfillment and connection and understanding, they're just leaving all that on the table, first of all. And then they're going to chase usually cred, right? And sort of internet validation or validation from their friends or somebody acknowledging what they've done. Because let's be real, if you're just fishing for you and you're just out there to fish, you probably don't really care about whether or not you caught the biggest fish in the world. And in fact, if you're out there only to catch big fish, it's usually, and I'm not going to say that there is nobody out there who can toe this line and say that they want to catch big fish just because they want to catch big fish for their own edification. That person might exist, but I haven't met him. They want to catch big fish because they want to take a picture of the big fish and they want to put a measuring tape on the big fish, and then they want to post the big fish on social media in a marketing material, send it to their buddy, send it to their girlfriend, put it on the dating apps, whatever they might want to do. It is not for them, it's for someone else. It is by nature, as I said earlier, comparative interaction. It's a comparative pursuit. And unless you're doing it to post and put out there, then you don't have anything to compare it to and it loses its luster. And that means that these guys are chasing something that isn't genuine in my view. And that sucks because I think that they're missing the larger point of fly fishing, and particularly backcountry fly fishing, but even fly fishing generally. And that's really a bummer. And now look, does that mean that you can't ever take pictures of fish? No, it doesn't. I hear you guys going, well, Ross, you have an Instagram page. You post pictures of fish all the time. I do. You will find the most of the fish pictures I post are of normal sized fish, right? I might have a couple of really big cutthroat that I caught out of a random lake somewhere and I posted those. But for the most part, these are normal average sized fish. And there are usually pictures of only a couple of fish and then a whole bunch of pictures of the place. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that for me, the point is the place. The point is accessing and working in and succeeding in these incredible wild places in a way that allows me to interact with them. And that's really what fly fishing is in backcountry fly fishing. It's not really the point. It's not why we're out there. It just is the vehicle through which we get to touch and interact with and be involved with and experience these ecosystems that we're going out and accessing. And that's really where my heart is. And that's not to say that you can't ever be proud of a fish that you caught. Doesn't mean you can't post anything on social media. Doesn't mean you can't take fish pictures. I think that's all fine as far as sharing your experiences, your memories, the narrative. That's all well and good. So don't take this wrong. But if your sole point is to go catch a big fish and then post a grip and grin of you with the big fish so that someone else knows that your fish was bigger than his fish or her fish, ick. That is not it. That's not the point. That's not why I'm out there. And I sort of believe that's not why any of us should be out there, to be perfectly honest with you. Trophy hunting is not a terribly attractive pursuit in any outdoor field, but particularly in fly fishing, which should be all about a very intimate, hands-on, ground level connection with natural places. So look, if you're a big fish bro and this episode offended you, sorry, not sorry, but dude, you're missing the point, and I think you could probably do better. If you're going through your phase in fly fishing where you want to see and catch big fish, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. When I catch a really big fish, I get excited too. But I'm getting excited about the big fish because they're existing in an overall system where those fish are very uncommon. I'm not in a place where I'm just out chasing only big fish and only going to places where big fish are, where they might be. That's not it. And if you're in the stage of your fishing career where you go from, okay, in the beginning, you just want to catch 8 fish, and then you want to catch a lot of fish, and then you want to catch really big fish, and that's the phase you're in. And then you go back to, I just want to catch fish. And then eventually it becomes, I don't even really care if I catch fish. I just want to be outside in the water and experiencing these places. It's okay. You can go through that phase. There's nothing wrong with wanting big fish. You want to take a few trips a year to go catch a couple big fish. Cool. Knock yourself out. But please don't let it become the point, because I think as soon as you let it become the point, you lose the point and you start becoming something that you're not. You start pursuing a form and a version of the sport that I think is at best artificial and kind of icky, and at worst, something that can encourage some pretty bad behavior and really unfortunate activities related to stocking and fish feeding and fishery management and a whole bunch of other stuff. And that's just not something I think we ought to get into. The wilder these places can stay, the better off we're all going to be. Just let the trout be trout. They know what they're doing. They've been doing it for millions of years. These rivers have been around since before the first human stumbled upon them. Don't mess with them. Leave them alone. Enjoy them for what they are. And for the love of God, stop sending me your big fish pictures and complaining about my 8-inch brook trout, because I don't care. You're just missing it. Okay, guys, that'll do it for this week's Complaint Corner. I'm done bitching about this. Thank you for hearing me out on it. I'm sure some of you disagree. If so, feel free to send me a note about how wrong I am at backcountryflyfishingpodcast@gmail.com or in my DMs on Instagram or wherever you want to do it. Tape an angry note to my door. It doesn't matter. But I appreciate you being here. Complaint Corner is always pretty fun, even if we get to talk about some spicy stuff. And I'm looking forward to seeing you guys back here next week. Until next time, this is Ross, and maybe I'll see you out there. Please just remember that I don't give a fuck about your big fish pictures.